Thank you for waiting. We will start the next session, Digital Transactions, the Future of STO. Introduction of the panelists. From the Financial Services Agency, Secretary General of the SESC, Securities and Exchange Surveillance Commission, Mr. Motono Matsuo. Please welcome him. From Bank of Japan, Head of Fintech Center, Deputy DG Payment and Settlement Systems Department, Mr. Yutaka Soejima. Founder and President of Nudge, Mr. Takashi Okita. President of Ginko, Mr. Muto Morikawa. The moderator of this panel, staff writer of Department of Economics from Nikkei Shimbun newspaper, Fumika Sato. I will hand over the microphone to Ms. Fumika Sato. Thank you for the introduction. I am Fumika Sato, a reporter at Nikkei Shimbun. The discussion will be about STO plus a transaction payment and settlement. FSA, Bank of Japan, and entrepreneurs have joined us. We hear from the authority as well as the businesses. May I first invite Mr. Soejima? On Friday last week, STO report has been released. Therefore, can you tell us about the STO background?
Yes, thank you for the introduction. I am Soejima, Head of Fintech Center of BOJ. As you mentioned, just past Friday, we published a paper regarding STO. So we've extracted one slide, and I would like to introduce that to you as a leeway into our discussion. Why then is the Bank of Japan interested in developing infrastructures for securities? We hope we will be able to touch upon that later on in our discussion. But there are two things. So first, we have ICO, we have the blockchain platform, and this scheme is used for fundraising products, whether they securities or not. There was a huge discussion in the US, and then the regulations eventually were developed. How do we overcome the issue of disclosure? So there have been rules and regulations being made, and the STO is now being used. I think the biggest change we are seeing is the main players, large securities, central security deposits, CSDs, or other players are now entering this market and experimenting with this new topic. And the STO is spreading throughout the security value chain from the initial issue to warranty to security lending. So through and through, from end to end, STO is now a part of the security value chain, and we are seeing a variety of developments across the world. And the other aspect is technological support. In order to realize and enable STO, there have been many engineering companies that provide solutions. And the background is the crypto exchange. We had a centralized exchange for crypto assets. And on the other hand, we have DEX, a decentralized exchange that is placed as the opposite of the centralized exchange. We have applications, dApps, and then provide exchange services within that framework. The service itself is not used in the secondary market of the securities value chain, but these large players are now cooperating with each other to create a new secondary market. And if we could go to the next slide. So today's topic, not only about STO, we are here to talk about digital transactions in order to create a new securities market or a market not only handle the securities but also ties other services in its stage of development. And this is a kind of market that we are bound to see in this information-centric era. In order for such market to develop, I think there are four aspects. One is to discover excellent use cases where needs exist in order for this market to develop in a sound manner, and how this market can benefit the society. And when something is useful to somebody, it means it can generate profit. It's not only for issuers or intermediaries or brokers, but also for investors and also beneficiaries of those services. They profit everybody involved. And of course, it has to be a market that is sound. That's the first aspect. And the second is technological feasibility. This refers to transactional capabilities. How do we overcome the issue of scalability? That's on the supply side. The demand side is also important, and this refers to the user experience. What kind of infrastructure should be developed in order to achieve UX? And the third point is related to regulation. In order to build a sound market, what kind of securities regulations need to be put in place? And the fourth, where there is market, there exist payments. So this payment infrastructure is to be introduced to a new market. What kind of new payment infrastructure then will be necessary? Is the existing infrastructure for payments need to be modified in order to meet the needs of this new market? I think these are four topics that need to be discussed as we visit this topic.
Thank you very much for the highlight, the gist. May I invite Mr. Matsuo from the FSA? From July, you are with the SESC, but already you have a long experience of legislation related to fintech. The positioning of security token, it has been legislated by the revision of FIEA. Can you tell us the thoughts behind? Thank you for the question. I have been a member of this FinSum from the inaugural event, and therefore I am very happy to continue to promote fintech. About the latest revision of the Japanese law for crypto asset or ICO, it is a kind of a legislative package related to crypto asset. There are similarities in terms of STO, so there must be integrated legislation. There were leaks, outflows of coins, and other incidents. There were problems related to advertisement. As Mr. Sojima mentioned, we had the ICO incident. As a result, we tried to have a kind of a legislative package to deal with multiple issues. ICO-STO, risk-based disclosure, or there are offering-related regulations. If they are highly liquid, it's a balanced legislation. It is limited participation. If the considered risk is not too large, it is more relaxed accordingly. In parallel, not exactly in parallel with the latest revision of the law, but as Mr. Sojima just mentioned, in terms of payment and settlement, there are lots of digitalization efforts. In the growth strategy of the government of Japan, there are discussions about that. First of all, the transfer fee to revise is included. For small lot payment, it would be useful, but high frequency, small amount payment, it can be made more convenient. and there are ongoing discussions to make it more convenient. Non-bank participants, their participation is also discussed in the payment and settlement, as Mr. Soshima mentioned. The behind-the-scene payment and settlement in the back office, I think it could be very interesting. This was my introduction. Thank you. Mr. Morikawa, your comments. So you have established a Ginkgo, a custody of a wallet. As you do the business, going forward, a business utilizing security token, what is the prospect? What use cases do you have in your vision?
Yes, thank you. Since around 2017, we've been providing a cryptocurrency wallet, and we've specialized in this area. As was mentioned in the beginning, when we speak of security tokens, of course, ICO is something to think about. ICO for us, a venture capital, we have a vision, and then we seek funding and investment for our ideas. Basically, in this case, this is akin to points. That's something we sell in order to raise funds, and there will be something that generates dividends for its business viability. And then eventually regulations are introduced. As for security tokens and its use cases, two things come to my mind. First, as we saw earlier in the slide, the digitalization of more traditional securities. So this is one area where digitalization is the focus. The other is making profits utilizing blockchain and DLT technologies to drive costs down. This enables products that were unprofitable in the past to be included. For real estate, we are seeing small investments being made. Whiskey is another product that is now available through this. So I think we're seeing a more variety of assets, financial assets. But as was mentioned before, the existing financial players, the securities companies and others will be utilizing this. From our perspective, from a venture company, there was a ZADAO that gathered a lot of attention. I think that is one area that is also related. That is different from a traditional financial assets, more derivative type of assets. I think that's where we are exploring today.
By a demonstration, as we look at activities, corporate bond, these are the areas that are active. At the initial stage of the market, those would be the start point.
Right. I believe a market is being created where regulations exist because this is part of the Financial Instruments and Exchange Act. So products that are similar to the existing securities is where we're seeing regulations being imposed. When we think about new possibilities, of course, there's something I cannot fully disclose at this time, but there may be some types of assets that will emerge outside of the existing regulations, whether it's the market-in type of approach or whether regulations come first. I think that's up for debate. But from the private sector side, I think this is a new initiative.
Wine. Yes, wines and sneakers.
And also, I think there's a type of animation production committee type of working that is commonly used in Japan. I think that's one common approach to raising funds, and this opens up a whole lot of opportunities. How and where the existing regulations apply today, I think we still need to ascertain that. Not much is clear. So those are some use cases that I expect.
Thank you, Mr. Okita. So far, you have started your business for payment, SBI, Plasia, and now you have founded Nudge, a Japanese type of challenger bank is what you are aiming to be. Today's topic is security token. If you can tell us your vision about expanding digitalization, what fresh services might become available? Thank you. In terms of DLT, as was discussed, Raspberry Cluster is what I have been engaged in the market. But originally, there was the Very Trans company, which was co-founded in the 1990s. So in terms of digital payment or fintech, I have been already in this area for 20 years. Therefore, in my case, within the fintech area, I think I entered this area from the technology side. So I have been in this area for 2 decades, but the infrastructure is the key. I might say that we are sort of working behind the scene. Indeed, payment and settlement is becoming more popular as a topic, but it's a behind the scene infrastructure. And what was the original innovation? I think that is the hidden or behind the scene important aspect. A new payment infrastructure revision are under discussion, and I have been involved in the relevant task forces. Mr. Matsuo, you organized the study group, but frictionless has constantly been the key word. It's like a superhighway for the payment, no friction, very smooth. Then, if that becomes possible, what else can be done in the future? That I think is the most important. By this kind of dialogue, what is the advantage for the users is important. Fintech causes power shift. The power shift is strongly advanced. But the protagonist, the provider, financial institutions were stronger in the past. But with fintech and digitalization, the user, the customer side has more strength and power. So from the user's perspective, we would like to envision the future possibility. We have excellent panelists, so I wish to learn from all of you as one of the audience. Thank you. Indeed, the service provider, regulation, how technology will develop. In addition to that, whether it is advantageous for the users or not, that's important, not to be forgotten. I agree. About overseas circumstances, Mr. Sojima, in your report, there was reference about what is happening outside of Japan, in Europe, the United States, about security token. Any recent fresh information?
The movement for developing the entire securities value chain is one thing, and the other is partly applying the blockchain technology where possible. I think these are two main groups that are emerging. Mostly in industrialized countries, we have some examples that I have picked up, which is also described in the report, so please refer to that. But personally, I am looking at cases where the central bank is involved. In case of Switzerland, Swiss Security Exchange Commission have the SDX, the Securities Digital Exchange. That is what they are trying to create versus the traditional SIX. So the funds settlement at that exchange, in other words, the Swiss central bank is going to use the blockchain and on a pilot basis issue CBDC used for those transactions. So that's their plan. A similar initiative is being taken by French central bank as well. And they are now looking for partners to join in this project to do similar kind of transactions. In case of Switzerland, large local financial institutions have already issued securities, so they are engaged in that pilot together with those institutions. The Bank of England is taking a slightly different approach. RDGS system is now being updated. And when they update this system, they have regional banks having accounts in central banks. The RDGS system today is now being open to outside parties, companies that use the blockchain. In other words, this system is going to be linked to the outside systems using open API. This enables funds settlement and transactions to wider markets. There haven't been any concrete example, but they are exploring this possibility. So the central bank money in a traditional sense is now being expanded to new transactions that is slightly different from the two other examples.
In Japan, the discussion has only started, but in Japan, is there a possibility?
Actually, the experiment has already been initiated. The Bank of Japan and ECB, European Central Bank, are engaged in a project together called a Stellar project. In the morning session, the fourth project in the Stellar, the privatization of information was the topic. And in that session, result of that testing was reported. About 2 years ago, we were in phase 2. That was the DVB. We had 2 ledgers at the time, one for securities, one for funds. And we used AdMix app for DVB transactions. And we experimented, and we were able to prove that it would be feasible. And we were also able to identify certain issues through that experiment. So from early on, securities transactions infrastructure or funds settlement infrastructures were to be altered with this technology.
So you are fully prepared when it's possible.
That's right. We need to catch up on the technology side. When social needs arise, it will be too late for us to start studying the topic from then. So we need to be quick to adopt the needs and new technology.
Thank you. About the security token, for the market to develop, what are the challenges that have to be overcome? May I ask Mr. Morikawa? Mr. Morikawa, POC, there are lots of efforts, but when it comes to market growth, the cost of offering, issuance, disclosure, distribution, custody, lots of issues. In the Japanese market, what do you think are the challenges?
Yes, thank you for the question. Going back to what was discussed, I think there are various things. First, on use cases, there have been and there will be many use cases that will emerge. What I find interesting is that securities and the existing finance people are one group, but people outside of the existing framework, they are coming up with new ideas whether their assets can be utilized in one way. So I think non-finance activities will be increasing, and more use cases we shall see. And as Soejima-san said, whether to change the entire value chain or only partly change it, I think that's another discussion. Looking at the existing securities value chain and the DLT, I think where and how we can combine the two is another aspect, and the regulations matter in this regard. So those are the 3 aspects that we need to be aware of. What do we want to achieve and how do we want to achieve it? That's the difficulty. And furthermore, with the existing financial institutions and tech companies like us, of course, we need to collaborate together to make this happen. This kind of relationship should be built solid. And in overseas, there are companies that have the function of issuing security tokens, companies that specialize in custodianship. We are seeing many such companies, so ecosystems are already developing. Those ecosystems further need to be built. I think that's the first challenge.
To make the system and to support the activities or the investors, it's whether the chicken or the egg comes first, but it must be an integrated advancement for the market to grow. So it's a long way to go?
Of course, we are one player in that, and we would certainly like to contribute to the development. But from a venture company capital, there are still a few players. It's still the large financial institutions finally starting to initiate. And there are venture companies that support that initiative. Of course, this is in the form of collaboration. We co-create, but there are very few partners.
You want more actors.
Yes, we want this to be a joint effort.
Now turning to Mr. Matsuo. In fact, yesterday there was a session on STO from the private sector, from financial institutions. There were members. There were views related to regulation. The FIEA, the Japanese law, has made the rules in the existing legal framework. Rather than trying to comply with the existing legislation, there are fresh instruments that could be created by innovation to think about whether it's the possibility and then create a fresh legislation. That way of thinking could be a possibility. The latest FIEA revision, what was the start point? There were lots of ICO related, not very good situations, and therefore something had to be done about some of the not very good incidents. That's the first point. And whether you call it existing framework. In the area of finance, in the United States, there are some 10 or so authorities, whether they are banks or insurances, but in the case of Japan, there is a single entity, FSA. If it is crypto asset and how to legislate under the Payment and Settlement Act, whether this is called a money or considered a security, it's not the starting point. Because it's a crypto asset, with this kind of system that can be utilized under jurisdiction of which government, there is no discussion about that. It's only the FSA. In that sense, Japan, I think, has an enabling government agency organization. So, as you mentioned, together with technological advancement, and as was mentioned, empirical and demonstrative studies are ongoing. Ultimately, the point is, innovation must not stop, but investors, users must be protected. And if there is distorted balance, it is not sustainable. If there is an imbalance, too much innovation, then the senior citizens might be deceived, for example, because of unbalanced regulation. The regulation had to be revised. But if it is too biased on user protection, then there will be no innovation. So a best balance. And therefore, based on the changes in the innovation, the legislation also has to be adapted. What I would like to see, as Mr. Sojima and Mr. Morika mentioned, quality use cases, lots of good experiences, I think is more important than ever, according to my experience. Mr. Okita or Mr. Morikawa, I wonder if you have any radical questions to Matsuo. Any questions to FSA?
This is regarding security tokens. There are people and companies who would like to do business using security tokens, and I talk with them, and I see a disconnect. Some of them, I think, have this attitude to wait for regulations to be implemented, but I think it's not. It should be the other way, or should it? Is my question. Because for us, I think we should start from where what we want to do with our businesses, and together with the regulator, we should think about regulations and what would be necessary. But actually, from businesses' side, they are too mindful of the regulations, and then the businesses and their visions come secondary. They have hesitation from my point of view.
I think I understand what you are trying to say. The existing financial institutions idea, they have traditional way of thought process. They have their own expectation because of the existing legal framework. On the other hand, fintech businesses tell me that the customers demand this, so it's a user-initiated demand. In that sense, the traditional financial institutions also have started the way of thinking. They are becoming more user-oriented. As a result, of course, there is reputation risk, which has to be taken care of, but what the users want, and that perspective, I think, is causing the changes in the perspective. We are in a transition, so the fintech businesses and existing players, there are lots of room for collaboration. And the existing financial industries can also be more user-oriented without undermining their reputation. 5 years ago, I think nobody was thinking in this way, and we didn't hear the word fintech. But the community atmosphere has changed, and I think this change will only accelerate through digitalization. We look forward to more collaboration, and such collaboration is welcome, I think. I mean, by even ourselves, if I say we welcome. Thank you. You mentioned transition.
Of course, we are one tech venture company, and together with large companies and others, I think we need to co-create. The third party, tri-party co-creation, I think, is the era we are entering in. And I think the possibility, if we are user-facing, we talked about regulations. If it's within the framework of the FIE Act, I think businesses tend to be confined in that framework. I think we need to look outside and beyond that framework. Am I understanding you correctly?
In that sense, yes, that's the direction. But why do we have the FIEA? Partly it is for users' protection. If it is investment, someone's money is entrusted to increase that monetary value. So money is entrusted, and if that is invested into business, it must not be diverted. For similar risks, similar legislation should be applied. How to prevent deception or fraud, that is the purpose. So I mentioned about innovation and the user's protection, but there must be a balance between the two aspects. That will be a constant difficulty. Mr. Okita, any response from user's perspective to spread the service? Any comments? As was mentioned, about 5 years ago, there was the study group, working group on payment and settlement code, and as Mr. Matsuo mentioned, everything has changed in terms of innovation. If I may say so, probably there was not much user-oriented, customer-oriented perspective which has changed. On the other hand, I agree that this is transition period. From my perspective, the private sector side, there's a lot of mixed perspectives, I think. Not everything has changed, or not everyone has become user-oriented yet. Innovation. I think FSA was pressured by the changing reality. Looking across the world, of course, investors need to be protected, but in terms of user protection, without innovation, opportunities will be lost. Looking just at Japan, if that does not exist, it does not exist, and you do not notice the absence. But if you look outside of Japan, quite a lot is already available. But in the case of Japan, we are 2 eras lagging behind, for example, because you don't know the existence, you don't realize the absence. So in order to promote, to stimulate, maybe I dare ask the FSA about your expectations to ourselves, the private sector. Of course, people have different opinions. My personal opinion is that fintech businesses, and as I've been looking at traditional financial institutions, but customer-oriented, user-oriented, and be agile, flexible, quick, plus whether IT knowledge can be utilized and developed on their own. Such younger generation should be allowed to come up with fresh ideas. Otherwise, new services cannot be offered by the established financial institutions. I think that is the challenge. At what speed and to whom you focus and have the technological ability and have the agility. I think that's the competition. Thank you. Unfortunately, there's only 5 minutes, so it will be your final comment. As I listened, innovation and investor protection, user protection, it's always walking a fine balance. By way of concluding this session, may I start with Mr. Soejima, your final comment?
The theme of the session is digital transactions. If you think about it, it's a strange, odd words. Other than cash payment, everything is digital. So what do we mean by digital transactions? I think something different from conventional transactions that is emerging. And I think that something is information, how to collect information and how to utilize the information collected. I think that is the first part of what is digital. The first part, the collection of information may be digital, maybe information entry or input may be manual, but using information and how to utilize this information end to end until the settlement is completed. All economic activities are accompanied by payment or settlement. So if we isolate this as a settlement business, as was mentioned, it would not do. It is the end of the entire business flow. It has to spread throughout the business model. So I think we need to think about that to fully understand the meaning of digital transactions. So how do we collect information and utilize it? I think we are competing in giving good ideas. I've been participating since yesterday, and I have been able to gather many tips. And not only tips, but there are companies that have already commercialized those solutions. So I think we will see more breakthroughs in the future. Of course, I have certainly hope for that. And the infrastructure needs to be built to accommodate that.
Thank you, Mr. Morikawa.
Well, I think use cases need to be built up. We are already seeing some hints and tips, and we are seeing growth. Businesses, large companies, venture companies, they need to collaborate. And also on the regulation side, regulators also need to be on board. Together, the industry needs to come together to build this together. And I think we are heading in that direction. So creating new businesses, that's where we are headed. And as a company, as a player, I think we need to emphasize and value connections in the industry. In Japan, we hope to see more new use cases, and I hope to contribute to that. And those of you who are participating in this event, I think we should work together to create innovation.
Mr. Okita, the use cases of ST, as Mr. Soejima mentioned, if CBDC issued, the settlement will also change. In fact, right after this, that would be the topic. Only the advantages like Libra and the digital renminbi, there are discussions about advantages, but indeed there is a room for expansion. But under the current infrastructure, the necessary time period, necessary structure with the atomic case, it may no longer be necessary. But it's not only about payment and settlement, it's for the entire fintech. With new technology, in the past, it might have been common knowledge in the world of professional, but such expertise may no longer be necessary. I don't think I am such a professional, But from a layperson's perspective, why was this necessary? Asking that question, I think there will be lots of questions if there are more to be traded as securities. That would be the case. User's perspective, customer's perspective was discussed. I strongly agree. Traditionally, the so-called financial common sense should not bind us. We should go back to scratch and try to re-establish the whole framework. Then, how technology can be utilized in the society and by each and every individual. I have a little girl in the primary school age. About the future of my little daughter, if I think about the longer term future, I want even a better world for my little girl. So I wish to be a contribution. Finally, Matsuo-san, I agree with all the key words: use information, leverage information, and providing service by one entity that's difficult and time-consuming. Behavior of financial institutions has changed. They are becoming more agile and fast. I look forward to reorganization, realignment of the industry, cooperation, co-working, not only within the financial industry, no longer need to stick to your traditional industry. Whether it's finance or non-finance industry, there should be cross-border collaboration. And what advantages to be offered to the users, that I think would be the perspective that will give us a brighter future. After all, digital transaction and STO, they are developing. So by combining those, I am sure that there will be even more exciting use cases. Thank you. Towards the future market development, thank you for all your deep insight. Thank you very much for joining us. We end this session.
Thank you very much. Please give a big hand to all the panelists. Thank you very much.